Hello, my tables, and good good day. So this will be the first part of digestive systems. It was divided into three, and there are just four areas that we'll focus on today, which is the esophagus, the gastroesophageal junction, the fundus, and pylorus of the stomach. So credits also to Junquierra on the top left, as I referenced them for the material here today. Okay, so before anything else, to understand the digestive system, now for each organ along that is part of the digestive tract, we have to always take note of the mucosa here that is subdivided to the lining epithelium, the lamina propria that may contain supporting connective tissue, and the muscularis mucosae, which is a layer of smooth muscle. Then is the submucosa that contains also blood vessels, no, and then afterwards the muscularis externa or the tunica muscularis, which contains the areas in different orientation of smooth muscle, no, oblique, circular, or longitudinal layer, depending on their orientation, and finally the covering, which is serosa. So that's how we should understand the constituents of the digestive system. Whether we're talking about stomach or later on the small intestine, there are certain characteristics, glands, lining epithelium, whatnot, where they will differ particularly in an area or in a tonic, because they call it Taneka Mucosa man or Taneka Submucosa. That will help you later on differentiate one organ in the digestive tract from the other. Okay? And here, no? So the M here is your muscularis Taneka Mucosa, sorry. And the submucosa just right below here, the section that muscularis externa here, and finally the tunica serosa. Okay, so now let's begin, and I hope this will be short. I won't talk that much. So first specimen is esophagus. Okay, so according to the book, we have to take note of the tonics and coats. So that esophagus is generally 25 centimeters long. Okay, so histologically they will be subdivided into three parts: the upper, middle, and lower. Okay, so I'll just say it now that the upper 1/3 of the esophagus is purely skeletal muscle. Now I'll show you it in the next slide. The mid 1/3 is a mixture of your skeletal muscle plus smooth muscle. And finally, the lower 1/3 is purely smooth muscle. Okay, that's why the upper 1/3, there's still some motor or voluntary innervation that can be done, like when you swallow. All right, so also, if we take into consideration each layer, okay, so we'll start with the tunica mucosa. The tunica mucosa contains the lining epithelium. Okay, so this one that I doodled in green, that lining epithelium for your esophagus is still your stratified squamous epithelium. Okay, the submucosa will have your esophageal glands. Okay, so they are located in the, just right here, tunica mucosa, huh? This area here is your tunica submucosa, and it has your, what again, your esophageal glands that help lubricate or protect the mucosa. Okay, so that's something you should take note of. Then, so see here in this picture here beside, you will see a mixture of your smooth muscle and your skeletal muscle. SM is smooth muscle fibers according to Junquierra. Skeletal striated muscle fibers here, ST, SM. So therefore, we can also consider or assume that this is your mid 1/3 of your esophagus. Okay, of your esophagus. Okay, we'll proceed on. So here, just a reiteration, and these are the slides I made when I was in med school. also. So this is taken from the lab. So the upper 1/3, as I mentioned, is purely skeletal muscle here. So you expect again in your muscles that the nuclei will be in the periphery. They are single cells, but they can be multinucleated. Okay, so the mid 1/3, just like the picture previously here, we said that it is the mid 1/3 is composed of skeletal and smooth. Okay, you see the skeletal muscle here, even an outer nuclei per. You can notice here, and this is your smooth muscle. Okay, so fusiform, spindle shape, very elegant looking. And finally, your lower esophagus. So if we try to zoom in, but you can't really appreciate it. Okay, but I hope you do. So it's 1/3. The lower 1/3 of your esophagus is purely or exclusively smooth muscle. All right. So again, your guiding area here, especially when we're talking about the GI tract, is also your lining epithelium. Because later on, as we go to the stomach, from stratified squamous, it will change to your simple columnar. Okay, so we'll carry on. So gastroesophageal junction is the next specimen. Credits to, I took this from this link here, so credits to them. No copyright, whatever intended. So here, the gastroesophageal junction is noted when there is an abrupt change from your stratified squamous epithelium taken from your esophagus going to your simple columnar, which is now in your stomach region. Okay, so that's basically it. You still see all the layers, the mucosa layer, which changes again the lining epithelium, lamina propria supporting connective tissue below, and the muscularis mucosae that could also contain lymphoid nodules. Okay, and one layer muscularis mucosae. So this will comprise this area. So I'll just put here. This comprises again your Taneka Mucosa. The submucosa layer is already below. Okay, and finally your muscularis externa. So here also is another picture taken from the actual lab. So again, stratified squamous going to simple columnar, esophagus going to stomach. Okay, and then one thing I want to also emphasize here is that you can also appreciate your cardiac glands, or your mucous esophageal cardiac glands, which is here. Okay, it's already in the submucosal area, because here is the muscularis mucosae, it's still part of your Taneka Mucosa. So here, tip na lang for you to identify this easily is if you look at the lining epithelium, there's abrupt change. Okay, abrupt change. And if you look at the lower submucosal area, you see glands there. So identify the specimen, gastroesophageal junction. Okay, identify structure pointed at is your esophageal cardiac glands. Okay, we'll proceed to the second to the last specimen, which is the fundus of the stomach. So we have to take note again of the Taneka Mucosa, Submucosa, muscularis externa, and serosa. But we will focus on what features that will help you distinguish the fundus from the pylorus. So first, the fundus of the stomach have narrow or shallow gastric pits. So these pits, I'll zoom in. These pits here, okay, these are gastric pits. The gastric pits will open up later on to the lowest layer, which is your Fondic Glands. Okay, it's actually subdivided into three. Fondic Glands, here is the isthmus or the neck, and the topmost is the pit. Okay, we will talk about cells you can find particularly in the fundus of the stomach. Okay, and they are your parietal and chief cells. And even in the textbook, there are mucous neck cells. Okay? So again, one consideration that we think that this is the fundus, not the pylorus region, is your narrow or shallow gastric pits. When we go to the next slide, you will see the difference in the pits. Okay, so for pylorus of the stomach, it is deeper. And then afterwards, in the mucosa layer, you will see your coiled gastric pits, as what I narrated earlier. And later, it will lead on to your gastric glands. The lining epithelium here now is your simple columnar epithelium, okay? It's simple columnar epithelium on top, because we already surpassed the junction from the esophagus going to the stomach. Now we're going to the other areas of the stomach. Okay, so each pit extends to the lamina propria. The lamina propria is the supporting layer here, okay? Aside from the other Fondic glands and cells you find, that's the lamina propria. And then they will extend to several tubular glands. So again, also the lamina propria is the vascularized area that supports your gastric pits. Okay? They may contain smooth muscle fibers, lymphoid cells, capillaries, and lymphatics. That's why you saw earlier that this area here in the stomach region also had a lymphoid nodule. Okay, so that was in the lamina propria of your stomach region already. It just didn't say which particular region. But again, your lamina propria can contain lymphoid cells and have lymphatic regions or lymphoid follicles. Next after is a muscularis mucosae here. Again, the one single layer area of smooth muscles. Okay, and it separates or delineates the area from your mucosa layer going to your submucosa. Okay, let's just keep it simple. I hope this is still simple from what I'm narrating now. So now that we've covered one important feature, that they have more shallow or narrow pits, we will focus on the cells you can find in the fundus of the stomach. So you can find parietal cells. Parietal cells are characteristically acidophilic. Okay, here they are acidophilic. They have a central nuclei, and also they produce HCl. They produce HCl and intrinsic factor. So intrinsic factor is needed that will help aid in the uptake of vitamin B12 in the intestine later on. So if you lack that factor, also there are specific pathologies involving that. Okay, but nonetheless, histologically, we can identify parietal cells being acidophilic or red, pink in color, and having a central nuclei. Okay, one other cell that may be found is your chief cell. So chief cell here. Your chief cells now, these contain inactive enzyme, the pepsinogen. That when pepsinogen goes to an acidic environment of a pH is 1 to 3.4, 3.5. In acidic pH, it will be activated to pepsin. Okay, and if you remember from your biochem, pepsin will aid later on in the digestion of your protein molecules or particles from food. Also, aside from that, your chief cells will also produce gastric lipase. Okay, gastric lipase that again will aid in the digestion of fats. How do you differentiate chief cells from your parietal cells? So parietal cells, for one, is very acidophilic or red. Chief cells, not that red, and you will see it kind of being dirty in a way, dirty looking, or granulated in appearance. So they are granulated in appearance because of the presence of several rough endoplasmic reticulum, or they have granules and the pepsinogen molecules. Okay, so you may have zymogen granules and etc. And then yeah, that's to aid in your identification. So here we'll point, this is a parietal cell, characteristic ayo. So this is in your Fondic gland area na the bottommost part of your stomach, because again, it can be divided to the pit, the neck, and the Fondic glands. And this here is, so it's kind of granulated, dirty looking in appearance. Not, you can't appreciate that central nuclei. So that is your chief cell. Okay. Here is a better presentation taken also from other sources. So just take note. Okay, your chief cell here in green, and your parietal cell, which is very acidophilic central nuclei. Okay. Last part is your pylorus of the stomach. Your pylorus of the stomach now has deeper pits, okay, deep gastric pits. Compare it late, you switch slides from this one to the one before. Deeper pits. And now in your pyloric glands, so they're not termed as Fondic glands anymore because we're in the region of the pylorus. So they're termed now as your pyloric glands. Okay? Your pyloric glands do not contain anymore your chief and parietal cells. Therefore, the glands here are more concerned with producing abundant mucus. Okay? As to the fundic area of the stomach, or the Fondic glands, where they produce molecules like HCl, intrinsic factor, that will later help in digestion. This one, pylorus, more of mucus production. Okay? So, they still have all the same layers, no? Or tonics, or coats. They have the submucosa. They have their mucosa layer. And later on, if you scroll lower, you also appreciate the muscularis externa and your Taneka serosa. But to differentiate them again, it's deeper pits, and there are no chief cells or parietal cells in the pylorus of the stomach. Functional wise, they aid more in producing mucus. Okay? And that is it for this week. Okay? Thank you very much. And please study well and correlate everything always with the lecture and the laboratory. Thank you.